Okay, so today we are looking at notes on solving quadratics and finding zeros using the greatest common factor. So we have already learned how to factor out a greatest common factor from quadratics. So now we're just going to take that one step farther and we're going to set the equation or function equal to 0 first, and then solve by using the greatest common factor. All right, and that learning target is I can solve and find zeros of quadratic equations by factoring using the GCF. So let's do a refresher of the zero product property. If you have 0 and a number is multiplied by, when 0 is multiplied by any other number, including 0, the product is 0. So for example, 0 times 124 is equal to 0. And 0 times -3 is equal to 0. And 0 times 0 is equal to 0. So if we have a times b equals 0, then either a is equal to 0, or b is equal to 0, or both of them are equal to 0. So when we want to solve, we will find the zeros by setting the equation equal to 0, factor out the GCF. Okay, so then we have something like 0, a times b equals 0, and then you solve each equation for a and b. All right, so let's go ahead and do that with a few practice problems so that we can understand what that looks like with quadratics. So first of all, we want to make sure that we isolate our f of x or our y. And for today's purposes, I think all of the problems, no, not all of them, but so for the first set of notes, these are already isolated for you just to make that first step, the first step is taken care of. So the f of x or the y is already isolated. So you're just going to set the equation equal to 0. So instead of f of x equals, we're going to say 0 equals, and then 2x squared minus 4x. Okay, and then the majority of the work is the same thing that we learned last week. We're going to factor out the GCF. So what's the GCF of 2 and 4? 2. So we'll say 0 equals 2. And what's the GCF of x squared and x? X. So our GCF is 2x. So we're factoring out a 2x. Okay, 2x squared divided by 2x is x. Okay, so I just factored out or divided out a 2x from this term. And now I need to divide out or factor out a 2x from the second term. How many times does 2x go into negative 4x? Negative 2. Okay, so bring down this negative is one way of thinking of it. And then what's 4x divided by the 2x that we factored out? It's 2. All right, so now we have factored out the GCF, which is what we learned how to do last week. And the next step is if we remember the zero product property, if these are equal to 0, okay, then either 2x is equal to 0 or the quantity x minus 2 is equal to 0, or both, and we'll plan on both. Okay, we'll solve for both. So 2x equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. And in this case, we're assuming that they're both answers are and. We will get to a point where you are going to make sure you're checking it, because you will have some situations where you have two choices, either this or that, and you have to check and make sure they're both real solutions. So here we'll divide by 2 to solve for x. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we have 1x equals, and 0 divided by 2 is 0. So x equals 0 is one of our solutions. Over here we have x minus 2 equals 0, so we'll add 2 to each side. This gives us x equals 2. So our answers are x equals 0 and x equals 2. All right, moving on to number 2, we have y equals 3x squared plus 9x. So we'll set these equal to 0. So 0 equals 3x squared plus 9x. So then we look at our greatest common factor. What's the greatest common factor of 3 and 9? 3. What's the greatest common factor of x squared and x? X. Okay, so then we'll factor out the 3x. So 3x squared divided by 3x leaves us with x. 9x divided by 3x is 3, so x plus 3. Okay, then I set each of these equal to 0 and solve. So 3x equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0. Divide each side by 3 to get x equals 0. Subtract 3 from each side to get x equals negative 3. So x equals 0 and x equals negative 3. Okay, and then you can check those in your equation. So if x is 0, to make sure you have these correct. So if x is 0, well, x squared is 0 squared. 0 times 3 is 0, plus 9 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 equals 0, so that works out. And then x equals negative 3. Okay, negative 3 squared is positive 9. 9 times 3 is 27. Put the negative 3 in here. 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. 27 plus negative 27 equals 0. So we can do a mental check step there, or you can write it out if you prefer. Okay, so those are both solutions. Okay, moving on to number 3. We would say 0 equals negative 9x squared minus 9x. Okay, we want our leading coefficient to be positive, so we'll factor out the negative 9x. Okay, the GCF is negative 9x. And then what's left over after I factor out the negative 9x? Well, negative 9x squared divided by negative 9x is positive x. And then negative 9x divided by negative 9x is a positive. Remember, negative divided by negative is a positive 1. And then you can check that with the distributive property. And when you have the negatives, I recommend checking it just to be sure. So then we have, with the zero product property, either negative 9x equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. So then we'll divide each side by negative 9 here to get x equals 0. Subtract 1 from each side here to get x equals negative 1. So our solutions are x equals 0 and x equals negative 1. Okay, number 4. F of x equals 12x squared minus 8x. So we'll say 0 equals 12x squared minus 8x. The greatest common factor of 12 and 8 is 4, so we'll factor out a 4. And the greatest common factor of x squared and x is x, so we'll factor out a 4x. Okay, 12x squared divided by 4x is going to leave us with 3x. Okay, so I'm just dividing out, or factoring out. And then negative 8x divided by positive 4x is negative 2. So 4x times the quantity 3x minus 2. And then we set, remember this is multiplication, so one of these two things will be equal to 0. So either 4x is equal to 0 or 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. So we solve for both of those here. Divide each side by 4 to get x equals 0. This is a two-step equation, no problem. Add 2 to each side. This gives us 3x equals 2. Then we divide each side by 3 to give us x equals 2/3, and then x equals 0. Okay, so x equals 2/3 and x equals 0. Okay, moving on to number 5. So we'll say 0 equals negative 21x squared plus 3x. Our GCF is 3x. Okay, we'll factor out the negative. We want that leading coefficient to be positive. So we'll say 0 equals negative 3x. Okay, and then what's left after I factor out? Well, negative 21 divided by negative 3 is positive 7. X squared divided by x is x. So 7x. And then 3x divided by negative 3x is negative 1 or minus 1. Okay, then I branch that off into negative 3x equals 0 and 7x minus 1 equals 0 because the zero product property. Divide each side by negative 3 here to get x equals 0. Add 1 to each side to get 7x equals 1. Divide each side by 7 to get x equals 1/7. So x equals 0 and x equals 1/7. Okay, number 6. So we'll say 0 equals 4x squared minus x. Okay, the only thing they have in common is the x, so we'll factor out the x. So 0 equals x. 4x squared divided by x leaves us with 4x. And then negative x divided by positive x leaves us with -1, because a negative divided by a positive is a negative. So we have 0 equals x times the quantity 4x minus 1. We'll branch these off into the two different possibilities. X equals 0, or 4x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to each side. It's a two-step equation. This gives us 4x equals 1. Then divide each side by 4 to get x equals 1/4. Okay, so x equals 0 and x equals 1/4. Okay, so now we're going to make it a little bit harder. So these are not already set up for you to be able to solve easily. These, we have to isolate the x, or excuse me, the y equals or the f of x equals. Okay, set all of our x terms and x squared terms on the same side, set it equal to 0, and then solve. Okay, they actually didn't give us any that have the y in it already, but if it did have a y in it or an f of x, we would just isolate that on one side by itself. Okay, since these don't, we just put all of our x squareds together on the same side and the x's on that same side as well and set it equal to 0. All right, so let's take a look at number 9. We have 10x squared plus 5x equals 13x squared plus 26x. So again, we want everything on one side. Move all terms to one side of the equal sign, and to make it equal to 0, factor out a GCF, and then solve. All right, so let's do subtract 10x squared from each side. 10x squared minus 10x squared is 0. So now I don't have any x squared on the left side. Great. On the left side, I have 5x. Okay, and then bring down the equal sign. 13x squared minus 10x squared is 3x squared. And then bring down the plus 26x. Remember, we want everything on the same side, so we set it equal to 0. So guess what we need to do next? Subtract 5x, because we want 0 here on the left side. Subtract 5x. So now we have 0 equals 3x squared minus 19x. Okay. Oh wait, I'm sorry, what did I do here? My 5x minus 5x. Why am I, I'm not sure what I did there. 21. Not sure why I did that. So plus 21x. This is just 26x minus 5x. Okay, so plus 21x. I apologize. All right, so let's make sure we have that fixed. You should have a minus 5x. I'm not sure why I wrote a 19 there. And then we'll look for our greatest common factor. So that's going to be 3x. So we'll factor out a 3x. So we have 0 equals 3x. And then 3x squared divided by 3x is x. 21x divided by 3x is 7, so plus 7. Okay, and then we'll branch that out into the different possibilities, either 3x equals 0 or x plus 7 equals 0. Divide each side by 3 to get x equals 0. Okay, that's a 7. Subtract 7 from each side to get x equals -7. Okay, so x equals 0 and x equals -7. Okay, number 10, we want to get, again, one side with no variables on it. So we'll subtract 3x squared from each side This gives us 0 equals 2x squared minus 14x. Okay, our GCF is 2x. Okay, 2x squared divided by 2x is x. Negative 14x divided by 2x is minus 7. Okay, so either 2x equals 0 or x minus 7 equals 0. Divide each side by 2 to get x equals 0. Add 7 to each side to get x equals 7. Okay, so x equals 0 and x equals 7. Okay, number 11. All right, so we just need to do one step to set the left side equal to 0. We'll subtract x from each side. This gives us 0 equals 3x squared minus 11x. Okay, 3 and 11 are relatively prime. They don't have any common factors besides 1. So we just have 0 equals x. X is the greatest common factor. And then we can factor that out. So this will leave us with 3x minus 11. Okay, set each side equal to 0. So x equals 0 and 3x minus 11 equals 0. Add 11 to each side to give you 3x equals 11. And then divide each side by 3 to get x equals 11 thirds. So our answers are x equals 0 and x equals 11 thirds. Sorry, went off the screen there. All right, and then number 12. Okay, we want to get all of our variables and all of our terms on one side and 0 on the other. So this is a 50x squared. I'll subtract 25x squared from each side. Subtract 25x squared from each side. Okay, so this will cancel out to 0. So 50x squared minus 25x squared is 25x squared. And then I'll just do this stuff here as well, just to save a little room. This is plus 100x. So we can go ahead and subtract 100x, subtract 100x. So 25x minus 100x is negative. I'm going to move my equal sign over so I have a little more space. So negative 75x equals, and then on the right-hand side, 25x squared minus 25x squared is 0. 100x minus 100x is 0. Okay, so we end up with 25x squared minus 75x equals 0. What's the GCF? 25x. So we'll factor out a 25x. And then what's left? 25x squared divided by 25x is x. Negative 75x divided by positive 25x is minus 3. And then bring down the equals 0. And it doesn't matter if your 0 is on the left side or on the right side, it's fine either way. So then branch it off, 25x can equal 0, 25x can equal 0, or x minus 3 can equal 0, and then solve, divide each side by 25 to get x equals 0, add 3 to each side to get x equals 3. Okay, so x equals 0 and x equals 3. So this is solving quadratics and finding zeros using the greatest common factor. And again, remember, when we graph these will end up being parabolas, okay? And the zeros are just, where our parabola will cross the x-axis that we're solving for. All right. So again, that was solve quadratics and zeros, finding zeros using the greatest common factor.